Being a marketer's no sweat. You just have to manage dozens of channels, launch hundreds of campaigns, score thousands of leads, and okay, fine, it's a lot of sweat. Unless you have HubSpot's AI-powered marketing tools to help you do all that and more. Get started at HubSpot.com/marketers.
Great days start with great underwear. So if you're looking for something special, give Tommy John and gift a better day. Everything we make is meticulously crafted from breathable stretch fabric for the perfect fit, including our sleepwear for him and her. It feels good to give, but it feels great to give Tommy John. Find something for everyone and pick up something for yourself. Because at Tommy John, greatness is in our very fabric. Shop TommyJohn.com/Spotify right now and save 30% site-wide. TommyJohn.com/Spotify. See site for details.
This episode is brought to you by NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV. There's a lot to be thankful for this season. For one, I'm thankful you can get NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV right now for only $209. It's exactly what you need as we head right into the playoffs. You can invite your friends over. Maybe you have a multi-view. You could have 4 different games, one for you, one each for the 3 other friends you invite. You can change the games around as soon as a game, the outcome becomes pretty certain. Dump that game, but in another one. I've become the multi-view master. The moment the one of the games is losing steam, I'm ready to move right in and move it for another one. Build your own multi-view. One of my favorite words. Thank yourself this holiday season. Get NFL Sunday Ticket for the rest of the NFL regular season for just $209. Sign up now at youtube.com/BS. Terms and embargoes apply. Device and content restrictions apply. No cancellations.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/campaign to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Welcome on in to another edition of Eye on the Enemy, powered by the Eagles Pin Pull Network. I'm your host, John Stolnis. I'm a writer for BleedingGreenNation.com, and this week we are previewing the Eagles-Giants matchup, 1 o'clock Eastern time at Lincoln Financial Field. One of the worst teams in the NFL that's playing a little bit better will be coming to town to take on an Eagles team that is absolutely rolling. But are the Eagles in danger of a trap game this Sunday afternoon? I'm going to talk to Mike Kaye. He's a Panthers beat reporter for the Charlotte Observer, a former Bleeding Green Nation alum, by the way, covered the Eagles for a number of years, so knows the Eagles pretty well as well, but is neck deep in Panthers land, and he'll be giving us an update on what's been going right for the Panthers over the last month or so. So we'll get to that coming up here in just a minute. Also, we're going to go over the Thursday night football game between the Lions and the Packers, some interesting decisions made by Detroit head coach Dan Campbell, and what the win by the Lions means for the Eagles' chances of getting the number 1 seed in the NFC. And then I'll run down some of the key games this week on the Week 14 schedule, let you know how I think they're going to all play out. So lots to get to here on this episode of Eye on the Enemy. And joining me to help break this game down, Sunday afternoon, Eagles, Panthers, a revitalized Panthers team, looking a little bit better here over these last few weeks. Mike Kaye from the Charlotte Observer covers the Panthers week in, week out. And Mike, I got to imagine earlier in the season it was a little bit of a slog, but I guess things are looking up a little bit. How you doing, bud?
I'm doing well. Well, you know what? Everything is going up when you leave Philly and then immediately cover a team that 2 weeks later fires their head coach, and then less than a year later, well, I guess actually a year later, fires another coach, and then they hire another. It's been a whirlwind, but yeah, you know, they're on the upswing. I mean, because that's the only way to go. Yeah. Well, and many listeners of the podcast know Mike because, you know, Mike was a long time Bleeding Green Nation writer, covered the Eagles for a number of years here in the city, now in Charlotte covering this Panthers team that I mentioned they've been playing some better football lately, right? I mean, they've lost 2 in a row, but looked actually really good. Some encouraging things in their last 2 losses. Played the Chiefs really tough back in week 12. Lost a crusher of an overtime game to the Buccaneers last week. Before that, beat the Saints and the Giants in back-to-back weeks heading into the bye.
And I think at the heart of it, Mike, it seems as though the quarterback is playing a lot better, right? The number one overall pick last year, Bryce Young, a nightmare season for him in 2023. Didn't get off to a good start in 2024 either. I know Andy Dalton got some run for them this year, but now is he starting to settle in? What's been going on with Bryce Young and this team's turnaround here over the last month or so?
Yeah, I mean, I think since he's entered the lineup, specifically after week 8, so he got his next start after being benched in week 3 in week 8 against Denver. There was a lot of garbage time, like catch up, yardage in there.
Yeah.
But once he kind of settled in and they played New Orleans at home, you started to see what I like to call Bama Bryce. Because honestly, if you did a true evaluation of him and you said, okay, if you're comfortable with the size, you're comfortable with the injury risk factor, this kid's dynamic. He can improvise. He can be kind of a point guard out there. He's really good at processing. You're seeing all that now. And I think a restart was really important for him. I think, we get into this whole thing where guys have to start right away. I think part of the reason why you see Jalen Hurts was able to ascend a little bit better is he did have that time behind Carson Wentz. He did have that time to kind of adjust to the NFL. Patrick Mahomes sat out an entire year. Jordan Love sat out several years. We need to get back to how it was probably in the NFL when you and I were growing up, where a guy would be drafted and you would take some time and he would be stewarded into this situation. And you would think that teams would be willing to do that given the amount of contract differential that there was, prior to 2012 or what it was. But Bryce was thrust out there last year. There was no real plan outside of a plan of just marrying like the McVay offense and the Reich offense, two completely different things. It's like saying, let's do peanut butter and pickles. Now that might work for somebody who's pregnant, but it did not work for a starting quarterback in the NFL, right? So I think what Dave Canales has done is brought him back to basics. They're very technique and development oriented. They're really focusing on his time in the huddle. The first 2 weeks, they were spending like obnoxious amounts of time in the huddle. So by the time you got the line, you didn't have a lot of time to process. And so I think that's really helped him. Now, they're not like getting they're not snapping the ball any quicker than anybody else. This isn't like a revolution of how to get to the ball, but he is able to like process, get to the line. We obviously know he's a shorter quarterback, but he's showing that high release that he had in college, which I loved. I mean, he's a tippy toe thrower, but you can get by on that. Like that's worked for other quarterbacks, and he's using his legs more. And I think that's part of his game. It's building his confidence.
Yeah, I know that, going up against this Eagles pass defense, I mean, it's going to be quite a challenge for him this week because Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, Darius Slay is expected to be back. He practiced in full here on Thursday. So it looks like they're going to have the full complement of their secondary back there. Certainly a challenge against what, since the bye week has been the number one defense in the NFL. And talk a little bit about his targets. I mean, Deontay Johnson, Xavier Legette, Adam Thielen is jumped back into the rejuvenation booth and is having himself a nice little season. I know the yardage total isn't there, but really been coming on of late and had a big week last week. What did Thielen? 99 yards through the air, 8 catches and a touchdown last week. Talk about a little bit about the skill position at wide receiver and tight end. What does he have to work with?
Well, so that's one of the dynamics that has changed since Bryce has gotten back in the lineup. Right before the deadline, they traded Deontay Johnson to the Baltimore Ravens, where he didn't play against the Eagles and didn't want to come back in.
That's why. Yeah, you're right.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they traded Jonathan Mingo to the Dallas Cowboys for a 4th-round pick, which shocked pretty much everyone I talked to in the league. He's gone like, you have as many touchdowns as he does in his NFL career. Is one of the better stats. So right now, Thielen was sidelined. He got sidelined in week 3, their first one of the season with a hamstring injury. He didn't come back until a couple of weeks ago. They've really tried to develop a chemistry with Xavier Legette, his big body target, who has come as advertised from like the big body perspective. He's still got to work on his route running. They're using him at X now with Johnson elsewhere. Jalen Coker is an undrafted rookie who has missed the past 2 games, but is a big draft Twitter favorite. he's really come on as of late. The two of them kind of remind me of Allen Robinson and Allen Hurns their first year, kind of similar makeup. One guy drafted high, one guy undrafted. They're kind of gelling together. And they also have David Moore, who's kind of like a trusty, like Greg Ward-esque veteran.
Mm-hmm.
And then at tight end, Jatavian Sanders, who hurt his neck and was out this past week. If he plays, that guy's a threat. The bar is very low, but he already has more receiving yards for a Panthers tight end than the position has had since 2019 when Greg Olsen was last in town. Tommy Tremble's kind of your Brent Selleck two-way, can catch if you need it.
Nice.
But he's more of a blocker. So it's trying to make it relatable for the Eagles.
Yeah, no, that's it.
Yeah.
You say you say Brent Selleck. Now I got you. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, you remember how much upside LJ Smith had? Like everybody loved how athletic that's what Jatavian Sanders basically is. If LJ Smith lived up to that hype in a lot of ways, he's still got a lot of work to do as a route runner, but he is really dynamic, and Bryce Young loves throwing to him.
Now, one of the things that Young does have is a decent running game, a decent running back. Chuba Hubbard, 919 yards on the ground, averaging 4.9 yards per carry, 7 touchdowns on the season. And I guess, I may be out of the loop, so forgive me if this is a dumb question, but Miles Sanders is still there, signed a big contract. I guess it was a year ago, right? Is he just kind of off the radar now, or did he get hurt? I'm not familiar with what happened to Miles.
Yeah, he suffered a pretty gnarly ankle injury in Munich on that soccer field, and he's been on IR ever since. It's really been the Chuba Hubbard experience. The guy that you kind of want to look at is Jonathan Brooks, who finally came off the non-football injury list. He tore his ACL at Texas, but they drafted him as the first running back in the class this past offseason. He's going to enter his third game. Last week, he showed a lot of promise as a tackle evader, I would say, especially in the screen game. That's going to be interesting. But Chuba Hubbard, this team goes as he goes. He's basically like a poor man's Saquon Barkley for this Eagles offense. He is not your most dynamic player, but he does not really lose yardage. Had a big blunder against the Bucs, fumbled in overtime, ultimately lost the game. But I mean, he's been nails for them pretty much all season. I believe he's 6th in the league in rushing as of tonight. I mean, I don't know what Jacobs is going to finish with, or Jahmyr Gibbs is going to finish with, but I believe they're a little bit ahead of him. So I mean, he's kind of like the straw that stirs the drink. They want to run. They've got a really improved offensive line, especially with the guards, Damian Lewis and Robert Hunt. And I mean, they've got 2 pretty decent tackles in the run game in Taylor Moton and Ike Ekwonu. I mean, again, this is not the Eagles line, but that's where the improvement lies. If they can bully you and they can control the clock, that's what they're going to want to do.
So I was going to ask, but that's the game plan then, is to try and establish the run early, get Young into some favorable third downs, third and shorts, that kind of thing, and just kind of eat some clock, keep the Eagles offense off the field. That's kind of the design.
I mean, I think that anytime you play Saquon, the idea should be to play away from Saquon. You know what I mean? Like, this defense is dynamic, but what I would say is the defensive coordinator, Jero Evero, and his mentor, Dom Capers, have a lot of experience with Vic Fangio. They know that defense like the back of their hand. Mm-hmm. Maybe that helps a little bit here, but I think the logic is to try to run on them as much as you can and hope you can take the ball out of Saquon's hands long enough in the first half, or he does not cook in the second half. But as we know, he gets better in the second half. So I don't know how great of a strategy that's going to be.
What is your take on this rejuvenated Eagles defense? Do you see this as more of a Vic Fangio thing, being able to adjust on the fly better than his predecessors did last year? Or is it more the talent that they've brought in? I mean, the first round picks that they made a year ago, or their first couple picks that they made a year ago, are just killing it right now. And it just the linebackers all of a sudden, how this has been forever since we've seen actual linebacker play in Philadelphia. You're seeing how dynamic a defense can look when you actually have good linebackers. Sure. Is it more personnel, or is this Vic Fangio finally getting the reins of a Vic Fangio defense here in Philadelphia?
So I made a joke to somebody actually the other day that he is operating at another level because he did not get to see a Phillies parade. Did you notice like the correlation of that? Like week
Yeah.
three, I haven't been able to pay that much attention to the Eagles. I mean, I've obviously watched a lot of tape and been able
Yeah.
to catch them when they're on national TV, but what it seems like sometimes, like, I know Howie Roseman from covering him extremely well or for a long time, that obviously he doesn't put a lot of weight into the linebacker position, but I think the way they're using Zach Bond shows you exactly why certain defenses thrive
Yeah.
with a very good inside linebacker. And I think he is a mistake cleaner upper. He
Mm.
is, you know what I mean? And when you have, and in my experience in interviewing defensive linemen, when you have a linebacker out there that can erase mistakes, you play a little bit more free. And
Mm.
I think that's very dangerous when you have somebody like Jalen Carter up front.
Yeah.
When you have somebody like Josh Sweat, you can go pin your ears back and rush. Milton Williams should be at the top of the Panthers free agent list. That kid is phenomenal. I've been a
Yeah.
fan of his since he got drafted. I was one of the few that was like, Lee McNeil, whatever. Um,
Yeah.
I think Howie Roseman's done an incredible job of filling out this defensive front. I think Quinyon Mitchell was a slam dunk. Cooper DeJean's done a really good job. Look, when you're a defensive line and you know that the next group behind you can clean up for you and make big plays, I think you play a lot faster. It's something, I overheard Chris Long say this in a recent podcast that when you have a defensive coordinator and guys are developing, that's like the first sign that that defensive coordinator can cook, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think you're seeing guys like Nolan Smith, who, look, I have a lot of friends who are Eagles fans. I'll get random text messages like, "What's the deal with Nolan Smith?" Like I get stuff like that. That's how I keep informed. And it's like you watch him and he'll win on speed. I mean, he kind of reminds you of a young Josh Sweat, really. And I was there in those early days, and it was not pretty, but he would win on speed. Um, I think everything's coming together because there's a sense of trust, right? And there's also a sense of trust in the offense. You know that Saquon Barkley is going to let you rest
Right.
for drives because he is just going to churn away. And I think it's a culture that honestly the Panthers are kind of blueprinting with Chuba Hubbard and their offensive line. Like I was talking about this earlier today, but like when you look at this offensive line, it's like Jason Kelsey didn't even retire. I mean,
It really is. Yeah.
Cam Jurgens is not playing to a Jason Kelsey level, but he is playing extremely well. Mekhi Becton at right guard is playing out of his mind. You look at, I mean, just watching the tape, Jordan Mailata is having a career year. I was a guy who, when I got here, after 2 years where he couldn't make the team, I was like, maybe it's time to cut bait.
Yeah.
Boy, was I wrong. I can't
Yeah.
wait for my hot freezing take when he's like an all pro.
Yeah.
I mean, Lane Johnson continues to be Lane Johnson. He's the best right tackle maybe in the history of the game at this point. He's
Yeah.
definitely in the last 20 years. And so this is such a tough challenge. I had Chris Franklin on my podcast, and he was just like, and this is good, and this is good, and this is, and I'm like, yeah, I know, Chris. Like, you're playing
Yeah.
a pretty bleak outlook for the Panthers.
What a change a year made. And this is the youngest defense in the NFL. Also, Howie Roseman needs to find a way to extend Milton Williams and Zach Bond. Like please get on the horn and let's get that done. So we're not stressing this offseason about it. And it is going to be a challenge for the Eagles defense to get Bryce Young on the ground. He's only been sacked once in 3 of the last 4 games. So he's done a good job staying on his feet. Let's flip the field a little bit here. Let's talk about, you mentioned the Eagles offense just a little as you were talking there, specifically the offensive line, and Saquon Barkley's name has come up. Not a whole lot of new things to say about what the plan is going to be for the Panthers defense. That is to stop Saquon Barkley and this running game, which includes Jalen Hurts. I mean, the RPOs are working. We've seen with this Eagles offense, especially when they're in no huddle, that they are really dangerous. I'd like to see them do that a little bit more. And they've had a hard time keeping all of their skill position guys on the field at the same time. There's only been, I think, 4 games this year where A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert have been on the field for the entire game together. And that's not going to be the case this week either, because Goddard is not going to play. So, but they get Devontae Smith back. A.J. Brown will be there. But the key is obviously still going to be stopping Saquon Barkley. And what we've seen the Eagles doing a lot more of, and I think Jalen Hurts has been a much better runner this year than he was a year ago. How do they stop this Eagles running attack? Can they stop this Eagles running attack, Mike?
B. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, so it's funny. They're the worst rushing defense in the league. And that's not funny, but like they're allowing 167 yards
Yeah.
per game. They're the worst rushing defense I've ever covered, and I covered the Eagles during COVID. Um, I mean, this is, you know how like fans used to complain about how the wide nine just couldn't stop the. This is like exponentially worse. Like this is so bad. Um, like I made the joke the other day that the over under for Saquon should be 160 yards.
Hmm.
Like, and he might get 120 by halftime. Like this is like when a freight train meets a baguette. Like it's like this is not a great matchup for this
Yeah.
defense. I think you've got J.C. Horn, who will not necessarily travel. He might in this game. He's their best defender. He's gonna face off against A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith, whichever have you. It's kind of interesting. J.C. Horn and Devontae Smith were the two guys I had pegged for the Eagles to draft that year.
Mhm.
They wanted one of the corners. And the way the story goes was, Carolina wasn't expected to take a corner. They took JC, and then Denver took, I believe then Denver took Surtain or
Yeah.
reverse. And then they got down to their list, and it was like Devontae Smith was the last one. So they traded up with the Cowboys and made sure that that all worked out. But anyway, so that'll be a cool matchup kind of to watch. Mike Jackson's pretty good against wide receivers with size. AJ Brown's a whole nother beast, though. He's kind of the Saquon of wide receivers. And then Grant Calcaterra is really interesting in this game.
I agree.
Especially because of the threat of the run. The Panthers have not done a very good job against crossing routes,
Mm.
especially against tight ends. And I think if there was a guy who could have a breakout game, it'd be Grant Calcaterra, just because I know how catch after or run after the catch he is. That's gonna be very interesting. I don't think this Panther or this Eagles offense really needs an extra blocker against this team. So Calcaterra isn't going to be limited where he is limited, right? Like he's not known for his blocking. It's going to be tough. This matchup is very tough for the Panthers. I don't know. I mean, it's kind of hard to sell like a competitive matchup here, but you and I have also watched, Joe Webb win games.
Sure.
We saw the Dolphin. I was in Miami covering the game when, there was that early pick, and then everything seemed to go
Oh,
down.
I remember that game. Yeah.
I was at the Ronnie Brown throw behind game. Like, I mean, like I've seen some, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think, look, I mean, any given Sunday, right? But like, this is a terrible matchup for the Panthers.
Well, okay. So then to finish up here, I mean, I know you're going to pick the Eagles to win this game, but so give me the scenario of how the Panthers can pull off this upset, because they have been playing better. They played the Chiefs really well, and the Chiefs are not the historical Chiefs of the last few years, but the Chiefs are still a top-notch football team, superior talent to Carolina. The Buccaneers are a real tough matchup. They've got a lot of good players on that team as well. So they've played teams that are better than them tough these last 2 weeks. Do they have it in them to keep this game close on Sunday against an Eagles team that I think is better than the Chiefs and the Buccaneers? I don't know how much better, but I think better than both of those teams. Like, what is the formula to actually pulling off an upset here on Sunday?
Well, I think part of the problem is it's where the teams are good, right? Like this is the absolute worst draw for the defense. But what I would say is their margin for error is low. They've got to run the ball, they've got to win time of possession, and they've got to win the turnover battle. That there are no negotiables there. Like that's what they need to do. And I think you set up Bryce with some quick throws. Part of the reason why they were able to beat the Giants and the Saints is the Saints and the Giants both tried to be slick and just really lean on the passing game when the cheat code is just to run.
Yeah.
Nick Sirianni is not running this ball 20 times in the first half. I'm not really sure what he is doing. As we know, the Eagles famously are throwing it less than any other team in the league, so I don't expect that to happen.
Right.
But I think their plan should be not only to run Saquon, but try to get some yardage with Gainwell, who kind of came on recently. I know that Will Shipley, a guy from Weddington, North Carolina, very close to Charlotte, hasn't really produced well, but even I would try to like get that going. You're going to be able to use screens here. Jalen Hurts has done a much better job of screen passes this year, evidently. And so I think, look, I think the defense is going to have to tackle it. That's the thing. Like, this Panthers defense is not soft.
Mm-hmm.
They are fundamentally off base all the time. Like, it's like their guys are pressing, so they're jumping out of their gaps, or they're trying to make a play on their own. They're playing hero ball. They're not tackling well. I don't think this team it lacks grit. I think it lacks, like, I don't want to say professionalism, but like
Polish.
polish. Yeah, that's the right word. I can always count on you, John. But like, it's almost like I write words for a living, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But what I would say is they've got to limit the damage, essentially, not give up sacks, not take tackles for losses, not turn the ball over, win the time of possession battle. And if they can accomplish that and Jalen Hurts forgets who AJ Brown is and Saquon Barkley, I, I don't know, man. Like, this is a really, and I've tried, like, because I know how this is going to be viewed as me, the former Eagles writer projecting this. I don't care who. I genuinely do not care who wins games. I haven't for a very long time. I try to be as objective as humanly possible on everything. But like, this is just a tough one, man. I don't know how you like logically pick the Panthers in this game outside of saying, well, maybe
Yeah.
Bryce has the game of his life, but we've also seen him have the game of his life against the Chiefs and still lose.
Yeah.
So, and against the Packers, his two best games have come in losses.
Yeah.
So, his three best games, really. And so, I expect Bryce to play well. He was born in Philly. He's got a lot of connections to the area. I think this is going to be a really interesting environment for him. I just don't know if the defense can hold the team under, 23 points, which is how they've won.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a rough matchup for Carolina. And I know there's, it's one of those games where as an Eagles fan, you don't want to look past a team like Carolina. And that's always a worry. It's a letdown game, especially because you would ordinarily think, oh, they got Dallas at home, Dallas. I mean, they got to go to Dallas the following year. Dallas. Oh no, it's Carolina that has Dallas.
They do, and that's a winnable game for them. That's almost like a hey, don't look ahead of the Eagles.
Right.
There.
No, but the Eagles have the Steelers at home the week after this Carolina game. So you wonder, is a game you look past? That. But I agree with you. I don't really see that as you haven't really done that under Nick Sirianni. I mean, last year's collapse wasn't looking past people. That was just a collapse. Otherwise, this team doesn't really look past inferior opponents. So I don't think it's going to be a terribly close game either. But I think we'll all be interested in watching Bryce Young play, watch him develop, and kind of see what happens on Sunday afternoon. It's a 1:00 start. So I think most of the country is getting the game. Folks, if you want to find out more about what's going on with the Carolina Panthers, make sure you are reading Mike Kaye stuff at the Charlotte Observer. And you mentioned the podcast a minute ago. What's the name of the podcast, Mike?
Processing Blue.
Processing Blue. It's on
their color is process blue, so I thought it was clever.
So it's not trust the process kind of a thing?
No, although they do say trust the process a lot in that locker room, which is wild. It's almost like, it's funny. It's like if your parents just learned like a slang word and you're like
if they just learned what no
means.
cap means, and all of a sudden at Thanksgiving, your dad's saying no cap the whole time. Yeah.
It's like you realize like the history behind that term, guy. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's very weird. But what I would say is like, I do think Dave Canales and Nick Sirianni have a lot of common vibes. You and I, being from the area that we're from, know all about vibes.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not saying that Dave Canales is the Garrett Stubbs of head coaching, but I think there's a lot of Kyle Schwarber to him.
Okay.
I think he's positive for the right reasons. It's just
Mhm.
you've got to buy into those reasons.
Yeah.
But I also think there's a lot of nick to him. I think he is a guy who is very confident in what he can do. I think he is very relatable on a human level. And I think, he's a guy who's got a lot of juice. And sometimes when I've started this new saying that I'll impart on you before we leave. When somebody has the juice and it spills over to the rest of the locker room, that can make for, a groovy smoothie. You know what I mean?
I do. Yeah, it's a conjuring an image, but
Yeah, certainly.
I do get what you're saying. Everybody follow Mike on X as well at Mike_E_K. That's K with an E at the end of it. Mike, thanks for coming on Eye on the Enemy, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
Great days start with great underwear. So if you're looking for something special, give Tommy John and gift a better day. Everything we make is meticulously crafted from breathable stretch fabric for the perfect fit, including our sleepwear for him and her. It feels good to give, but it feels great to give Tommy John. Find something for everyone and pick up something for yourself. Because at Tommy John, greatness is in our very fabric. Shop TommyJohn.com/Spotify right now and save 30% site-wide. TommyJohn.com/Spotify. See site for details.
All right, well, let's talk about this Thursday night game. The Lions beat the Packers, of course, in an offensive shootout in which no defense really was able to stop the other team's offense. And because of that, it was kind of hard to tell whether both offenses were really that good. I mean, Jordan Love made some plays for Green Bay that were just unreal. But then you've got the Lions offense with Ben Johnson calling plays, Jared Goff just insanely accurate under center. I remember there was a time when Carson Wentz was out playing Jared Goff, and we were all saying the Rams made the wrong decision taking Goff over Wentz. Remember that? Remember that brief little juncture of time back in 2017, 2018, even 2019? How times have changed, and Jared Goff is leading a dynamic Lions offense. They could not be stopped last night. But again, it was hard to tell whether that was because of them. I'm sure much of it was, and how much of that was because the Packers defense was absolutely porous. They couldn't get anything done. But the Lions defense couldn't really stop the Packers offense. It truly was one of those games where it seemed like the team that had the ball last was going to win. And that's one of the reasons why Dan Campbell, I think, made some of the decisions that he made late in the game on fourth downs. He got into a heap of trouble. Remember the NFC Championship game last year when he made a controversial decision on a key fourth down and it didn't work out. And he's been continuing to be aggressive in those situations. He made two key decisions late in the game. I think one was late in the third quarter. Maybe they were both in the fourth quarter, but one of which failed and handed the Packers the ball deep in Lions territory. That resulted in Green Bay scoring a go-ahead touchdown. The last on a 4th and 1, and this was the one that was absolutely crazy. They had the ball inside the 30, so they had a very makeable field goal. They had a 4th and 1. The score was tied, and there was under a minute to play. Most of the time, I think there were 47 seconds left in the game. You kick the field goal, put yourself up by 3, and yes, you're giving Green Bay about 40 seconds to get themselves into field goal range with no timeouts to try and potentially tie the game. You are still... Throughout NFL history, coaches have kicked that field goal, kicked off, and you give the opposing offense one more chance, but with the odds hugely stacked against them. 40 seconds, you're probably saying they got to go 60 yards down the field, or maybe 50 yards down the field to get into reasonable field goal range, with 40 seconds left and no timeouts. Very few teams are going to be able to do that. I mean, certainly you have a defensive brain fart, sure, that can happen, but you're winning that game like 98% of the time, 99% of the time. What instead Dan Campbell did was go for it on 4th and 1. After failing to convert a 4th and 1, I think it was 2 possessions earlier, they go for it again. If something doesn't happen, if the Lions get stuffed on the run play, or Jared Goff got tripped up by his center or an offensive lineman and fell to the ground as he was handing the ball off on 4th and 1, let's say he falls to the ground and misses the handoff, the ball gets fumbled, it rolls away. The Lions have thrown away an opportunity to take the go-ahead field goal to go up by 3 points with 40 seconds left in the game. It is a huge risk, but on the other side, if you get the first down, you can take the clock all the way down to 2 seconds, which is what they did, kick the game-winning field goal, and give Green Bay no time at all to go down and try and score a game-tying field goal. And Dan Campbell continued to roll the dice, continued to be aggressive. They got the first down. They ran the clock down to 2 seconds. They kicked the go-ahead field goal. The Detroit Lions win. If you looked at the analytics actually very strongly recommended kicking the field goal. It did not recommend going for it in that situation. Earlier in the game on the 4th and 1 at their own 35, there was a strong recommendation to go for it, and he did, and they didn't get it, and it resulted in a very short field for Green Bay. Momentum swung back their way. I just wonder if part of Dan Campbell's calculus is that he didn't trust his defense a whole lot. He didn't trust that his defense would be able to prevent Jordan Love and the Green Bay offense from moving 50 yards downfield. Let's say they start at the 30 to get to the opposing 30s. That's 40, 50, 40, 30. It's 40 yards. I'll amend that. To get 40 yards in 40 seconds. He didn't trust his Lions defense to be able to stop that. And maybe that's understandable. Maybe that's a good reason to not kick the field goal and give Green Bay 40 seconds to go 40 yards. But I sure would have kicked the field goal and would have rolled the dice. But as it was, his process worked, even though I think the process was broken. I think the eventual. I mean, and I disagree with Dan Campbell on both moves. And the first one, obviously, it didn't work out, even though I probably was going against the analytics, and the second one did. And I guess that's where the conundrum lies here. Like, how much do you rely on the analytics? Do you become a slave to what the computer tells you to do? Or, and how much do you rely on your gut? Because your gut is wrong. Your emotions can factor into a decision that really should be better left to be having emotion left out of it. So I get that. I get all that. And, I guess there's something to be said for just letting the computer or letting the analytics dictate what you do in those situations. But, I also come from the baseball world. And, back when Gabe Kapler was the manager in Philadelphia, every decision was based on the analytics, was based on the numbers, was based on some kind of computation or calculation. And, I was really in favor of that for a long time. And then you realize the limitations of that. Like, you also have to understand momentum a little bit. You have to understand game flow. How has your team been playing? How has it not been playing? And I guess in that regard, he recognized maybe his defense couldn't stop Jordan Love from going 40 yards in 40 seconds. If that's the Eagles defense, I think I probably kicked that field goal. I go up by 3, and I ask my defense, which has been playing as the best defense in football since the bye week over these last 8 weeks, to stop Jordan Love from getting to the opposing 30. But maybe you don't. I just would have been, because, even if you don't get the first down there, the game's still tied, and Green Bay still has to go 40 yards in about 45 seconds. So at the end of the day, you're still probably playing for overtime at that point. But if you kick the field goal, you're trying to stop them with the lead as opposed to trying to stop them from winning the game with a field goal. So I don't know. I'm of two minds on that. I think that it was still a foolish thing for Dan Campbell to do. If you don't convert that, it's a disaster. It's a disaster. And the confidence, you shake the confidence of your team in your coaching ability if you don't get that. But maybe the reverse is true. Maybe they, now they have more confidence in Dan Campbell, the gunslinger, after it all worked out. It was a terrific game. No defense was being played anywhere in that second half. But it was a really interesting, exciting game, and the quarterbacks were making some really great plays. Both of those teams are going to be very hard outs in the postseason. Of course, the Lions, there's the number 1 seed. And that was, for Eagles fans watching that game last night, it was a little bit of recon on both of those teams. The Eagles could face either one of those teams in the playoffs, but specifically about the Lions. And we were rooting for the Packers to win that game because it would have made it a much easier path for the Eagles to secure the number 1 seed in the NFC had the Lions lost. Unfortunately, the Lions won and pushed their record to 12-1. They've won 11 straight for the first time in franchise history. So now the Eagles cannot win the number 1 seed in the NFC if they have the same record as the Lions or the Vikings, interestingly enough. The Eagles need to finish with a better record than the Lions or the Vikings. And remember, the Vikings have the same record as the Eagles. The Vikings are also at 10-2. And they're just now a game and a half behind the Lions, but they are right there fighting with the Lions for the NFC North. Now, I don't believe in the Vikings. I still think with Sam Darnold, I would love to face them in the playoffs, and maybe I'll rue the day for saying that, but The Eagles would need to finish with a better record than the Lions or the Vikings, whether that happens to be 15-2 or 14-3. But at 12-1, the Lions would need to lose 2 of their next 4 games with the Eagles winning out. And thankfully for the Eagles, the Lions do have the 3rd hardest remaining schedule. Next week, they host the Bills. The Bills are playing fantastic football. Now, you get the game at home, that's where you want the Bills, but that's a game they could lose. Then they travel to Chicago to take on the Bears. That's a divisional opponent on the road. Again, the Lions should go in there. They should win that game, but divisional games on the road can be tricky matchups. Then you have to go into San Francisco to take on a 49ers team that may be out of playoff contention at that point. Who knows? But they have to go into San Francisco and beat the 49ers, a weakened 49ers team, and then you host the Vikings in the final week of the season. How much does either team need that game at that point? But you would think that would help out the Eagles a little bit because either the Lions or the Vikings are losing that game. The Eagles, meanwhile, have the 7th easiest strength of schedule the rest of the way. The Eagles have 5 games left. They host the Panthers on Sunday, obviously. And one of the reasons why you're wondering, could this be a trap game for the Eagles, is then you have the Steelers coming to Lincoln Financial Field, which will be a huge matchup. Then they have to travel to Washington to take on a Commanders team that has faded a little bit, but the Eagles lose a couple, the Commanders win a couple. All of a sudden, the NFC East is a dogfight again. But you have to go into Washington. That's been a tough place to play for teams this year, to take on a Commanders team. And then you host the Cowboys and the Giants. 2 games you should absolutely win. They finished the final 2 weeks of the season in comfortable fashion there. So really 3 very winnable games here all at home. And the Eagles have 4 of their last 5 games all at home. The only road trip they're making is a bus ride to the nation's capital. You host the Panthers, you host the Steelers, you travel to D.C., you host the Cowboys, and you host the Giants. Pro Football Network's playoff predictor has the Lions at 58% to take the number 1 seed. The Eagles' odds of winning the number 1 seed now 26.5%. So that's what has to happen. The Eagles would lose the tiebreaker to the Vikings and the Lions if they all finished 15-2 or 14-3. So the Lions need to lose twice, and the Vikings would need to lose once. One of which would happen again if the Lions and Vikings play each other, when the Vikings and Lions play each other in Week 18. It's really that simple. All right, let's take a look at some of the other games here this Sunday, and we'll start off in the 1 o'clock window. You've got the Falcons in Minnesota taking on the Vikings. The Vikings are 5.5-point favorites there. Obviously, we're rooting for the Falcons in that game. I do think the Vikings will win, but I think that'll be closer than 5.5 points. I think that'll be a field goal, 4-point game there. You've got the Saints taking on the Giants. Nobody cares about the game. The Saints are 4.5-point favorites on the road against the Giants. Take the Saints. Saints are going to win that game. And that's really in the 1 o'clock window. You've got Jaguars at the Texans. That's a yucky game. You've got the Jets in Miami to take on the Dolphins. That game stinks. And then the Browns in Pittsburgh taking on the Steelers. That could be interesting. And then you've got the Raiders in Tampa to take on the Buccaneers. Again, that's not a game really of any interest. And then you're looking in the 4 o'clock window. It's not a whole lot better. You've got Seattle in Arizona taking on the Cardinals, an NFC West battle here with all of those teams so tightly packed. I kind of like the Cardinals to win this game at home. They're just 2.5-point favorites, though. So the Seahawks seen as, I guess, a 0.5 point better of a team overall than Arizona because the home team normally gets 3 points. But I like the Cardinals to win that game at home against Seattle. You've got Buffalo in LA to take on the Rams. Again, another NFC West team there. They need that game, the Rams do, but the Bills are just playing too well right now, so I'll take the Bills to win in Los Angeles. And then you've got the Bears in San Francisco to take on the 49ers. Normally, you'd just say 49ers all the way, but I don't know where the 49ers are mentally right now. I don't know about Brock Purdy. I don't know what's going on there. I'm still going to pick the 49ers to win that game, but yeah, it could get interesting. That could get ugly for San Francisco. And if San Francisco loses that game, you might even want the 49ers to win that game. So that way their upcoming game in 3 weeks against the Lions has more of a chance of meaning something. So maybe you're rooting for the Bears in that game if you're an Eagles fan. The Sunday night game is the Chargers in Kansas City to take on the Chiefs. The Chiefs are 4-point favorites. I think I picked the Chargers to win this game in my bleedinggreennation.com predictions. That's how I'm feeling right now I think the Chiefs are due for a loss. They've just been kind of getting by the skin of their teeth, and the Chargers with Justin Herbert, they've got a good chance to go into Kansas City, a divisional opponent, on the road to go in there and steal a win. So I'll take the Chargers to win that game. And then on Monday night, you've got the Bengals in Dallas to take on the Cowboys. The Bengals 5.5-point favorites over Dallas. And yes, give me those Cincinnati Bengals. As for Sunday afternoon, Eagles against the Panthers, I just feel like this Eagles team doesn't really fall into trap games. They've done a great job of avoiding those letdown games, those sandwich games against lesser opponents during the Nick Sirianni era. That's one of the things Nick Sirianni has done well. Last year's collapse was just an overall collapse, but they usually, when they're playing well, they usually don't have a hiccup game against a weaker opponent. I think they're going to be happy to be home. I think the running game and the defense are really just two things that you can rely on. The Panthers just don't have a whole lot offensively that scare you. And you heard what Mike was saying about the defense, not being able to stop anybody. This should be another game where they dominate on the ground. So I like the Eagles to win this game in comfortable fashion. I think they're going to score into the 30s. I'll say Eagles 31, Lions 14. That's going to do it for this edition of Eye on the Enemy. My thanks to the great Mike Kaye once again for coming on the show and joining me here. And don't forget to follow all of the Eagles Pinpool Network podcasts by going to Apple Podcasts and subscribing to the podcast. Spotify, we're there as well. And you can also go on the socials and you can see all of the great film work that Johnny Page and Shane Haft do, in addition to all the other podcasts we have coming your way. And you can read my stuff at bleedinggreennation.com every week. I've got an article out this week ranking Saquon Barkley's current 2024 season among the Eagles' all-time great seasons. That's over at bleedinggreennation.com. That was a fun one to write. I hope you check it out. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time right here on Eye on the Enemy.